Major Gagarin was landing in Moscow, and Mr. K was with Yuri's wife and parents to greet him. What a hero was this young cosmonaut, unknown one day, the next, the most publicized man in the world. In the big heart of the emotional Russian people, the man from space held the place of honor. A bear hug from Khrushchev expressed the feelings of all the nation. Then came the family greetings, his father and mother included. What a moment for Valentina. Her husband was back after the strangest adventure in the history of mankind. No less proud of Yuri, and indeed quite overcome, was his father. In a triumphal cavalcade, Gagarin was driven into Moscow, sitting between his wife and Khrushchev. What the whole of Russia felt, the people of Moscow put into their cheers for hero number one of the Soviet Union, Yuri Gagarin.
Downpour notwithstanding, Manchester left Yuri Gagarin in no doubt that the great city had never had a more welcome visitor. The spaceman is a natural if ever there was one. No wonder millions fell for him. The Amalgamated Union of Foundry Workers made him #1 honorary member and gave him a gold medal. Union President Fred Hollingsworth said all the members felt that Yuri was honoring them by his acceptance. In a way, he was one of them, because in his younger days, Gagarin worked as a molder. Back in London, the Mansion House, where another hero's welcome awaited this amazing man. And it was raining there too. Yuri must have thought that all the jokes about a typical English summer were well-founded. With the Lord Mayor, Sir Bernard Whaley-Cohen, he waved to the thousands of city workers. Then to the Tower, steeped in history going back to 1078. There was such a crush of children and holidaymakers that the man of space hardly had space to move. But there, as everywhere else, he seemed to be enjoying it all to the full. And what a contrast, the Tudor dress of the beefeaters and the man who 3 months ago went into orbit round the Earth. The next call was at Admiralty House to see the Prime Minister. Mr. Macmillan said, "He's a delightful fellow," which just about sums up what everybody thought. Yuri had presented the Premier with an autographed book describing his flight in space. At Buckingham Palace next day, the astronaut lunched with the Queen. Her Majesty, her ministers, and all her subjects have been captivated by the charm of Major Yuri Gagarin. Never has Moscow sent a finer ambassador.
The Russian Tu-104 touched down on London Airport. Among its passengers, one of the world's most famous men, Yuri Gagarin. His initials on the number plate made for the occasion. The man who won a place in history by going in orbit round the Earth came to London to visit the Soviet exhibition. Clapping in Russian fashion, he acknowledged the cheers. For the government, a Mr. Turnbull, Secretary of the Minister of Science Office, received Yuri, and in the crowd of Russian and other officials, the spaceman was at times almost lost to view. Only a little over 3 months ago, he was unknown. Now he is guaranteed a tremendous welcome anywhere in the world. Occupying the seat of honor in a Rolls-Royce, Gagarin was driven from the airport on his way to the Russian embassy. From Hammersmith onwards, the route was crowded with people eager to see and cheer. Yuri has had plenty of this sort of thing in the past few weeks, but with a natural friendliness, he returned the greetings. At lunchtime, he arrived at Earl's Court for the exhibition. He was to meet the organizers there and after lunch hold a press conference. By this time, he could have had no doubt at all that the people of Britain have taken him to their heart. How popular was the announcement made about this time that the Queen had invited Yuri Gagarin to lunch on the following Friday.
We have a saying here when you're nervous about something that you have butterflies in the stomach or butterflies in the tummy. Can you really honestly say that you did not have any butterflies in the tummy before you started?
По-английски есть пословица, что если немножко так не по себе и беспокоишься, то в желудке прыгают бабочки. Можете ли вы заверить всех, что таких бабочек у вас в желудке не было?
Могу заверить.
Yes, I can assure you there were no butterflies, moths, or anything else in my stomach.
Your American astronaut colleague spent an unfortunate 3 or 4 hours in his spaceship before he started off. Did you have a comparable wait before the takeoff?
Will you repeat the latter part of the question, please?
Did you have a comparable wait sitting in the spacecraft waiting for the thing to take off?
Потому что ему пришлось несколько часов провести уже в кабине космического корабля, ожидая запуска. Вам тоже пришлось так понервничать в самом корабле?
Но я не думаю, что само пребывание в кабине космического корабля мое аналогично пребыванию в кабине Меркурия Шепарда.
You see, we were not in the same position, Shepard in the Mercury spaceship and myself in ours.
Несколько часов пребывания, моего пребывания в кабине космического корабля до старта не требовалось.
there was no need for me to spend several hours in the spaceship Vostok before the takeoff.
Это был довольно-таки короткий промежуток времени, в течение которого я, по-моему, вел себя совершенно спокойно, не нервничал. Да что наши ученые могут подтвердить по объективным данным, которые у них получены.
The brief period of time I did spend in the spaceship before the actual takeoff, I think I spent in a quite normal condition, and I think the scientists who were in charge of the flight will confirm this by producing the records, the objective records they have of my pulse count and so on.
Тем более, что повода такого, чтобы волноваться и нервничать, такого повода в это время совершенно не было, как и в течение всего космического полета.
And I don't think there were any grounds for me to be seriously anxious, either at that period or at any time throughout the flight.
You were saying a moment ago, objective records, scientists' objective records, makes me think of something. When are we going to see the color film, which everybody here is most anxiously waiting to see?
Видите ли, мне трудно сказать, когда вы увидите этот фильм, так как это зависит не от меня.
Well, it's difficult for me to give you an exact time because it doesn't really depend on me.
Я могу сказать лишь то, что этот фильм у нас в Советском Союзе уже вышел на экраны и демонстрируется в наших кинотеатрах.
With great success, I should add.
Yes, this film is now being shown in the Soviet Union.
It is?
Yes.
Will you, when you get back home, say, please, we'd like to see it here as quickly as possible?
Хорошо, я передам.
Yes, I'll be sure to do so.
If we could talk just for a moment about the spacecraft itself. Was the cabin on view at the Tushino Air Show, the one up there on the wall just behind you, was that the actual Vostok?
Кабину в Тушино на авиационном параде не показывали, показывали весь комплекс космического корабля.
The capsule as such was not shown, but the whole spaceship was shown at Tushino.
Я затрудняюсь, был ли этот, сказать, тот самый был ли, или другая модель этого космического корабля, но это
As to
точно.
the other part of your question, I can't say exactly whether it was the same spaceship or an exact replica.
Could you give us some idea what it's like being in this spaceship, how much room you have in it?
Просторно находиться в таком космическом корабле. Как примерно вы себя чувствовали? Много было места для вас?
Да, в кабине космического корабля очень просторно, гораздо просторнее, чем находиться в кабине самолета.
Yes, it was quite roomy. In fact, it was far roomier than in the cabin of a jet plane.
While we're talking about the ship in flight, there's one small mystery which I think possibly you may be able to clear up for us, but perhaps not, but I'd like to try. On the day when you were making the flight, on the day when Moscow Radio was describing you making the flight, there appeared in our communist newspaper, the Daily Worker, the report that the flight had been made successfully and that the flyer had returned to the Earth. And that report was dated from Moscow the day before. I'm sorry to put this at such length, but this created the impression, of course, that another flight had taken place and you had flown second, and nobody has ever dispelled this yet. Will you do it now?
Могу совершенно компетентно вам заявить, что, очевидно, корреспонденту этой газеты было известно несколько больше, чем тем людям, которые занимаются в нашей стране непосредственно космическими полетами.
Now, I can assure you quite authoritatively that evidently the correspondent of that paper felt he was better informed than the actual people who are in charge of this work in the Soviet Union.
May I have a question?
Такого космического полета не было еще ни у нас в Советском Союзе, не делали такой космический полет и другие государства.
No previous flight of this kind had in fact taken place either in the Soviet Union or in any other country.
Thank you.
Полет, который был совершен 12 апреля, был первым полетом в Советском Союзе, и, собственно, это был первый полет с человеком на борту космического корабля в истории всего человечества.
And I
The
have a
flight
question.
made on April 12th was the first flight in history of this kind, the first manned space flight ever.
Thank you.